Hello everyone, it's your Peacekeeper, and it's time to start our How to Play series on the Pan-Asian Destroyer line. And we are here with the Tier 10 Yoyang for the purposes of talking about Pan-Asian Destroyer Captain Skill builds. And to preface this, like I preface all of my Captain Skill build videos, this is by no means intended to be an exhaustive list of builds that are viable. These are merely intended to be a generator of ideas for you to get thinking about your own builds and whether or not these builds would be good choices for you, or if maybe you need to tweak and modify them. So by no means take these as the only ways in which you can build these ships. There are certainly an infinite combination of skills at which you could choose. And these are just more along the idea, just to give you an idea on how you can start off building yours if you're completely lost. So I've got 3 builds, and unsurprisingly, if you just watched the German Destroyer one, if you've watched my US Destroyer Captain Skills video, these builds are going to sound awfully familiar, and there's a very good reason for that. Now, the Pan-Asian Destroyer line, it's a bit of a mixed bag because we've got a combination of a multitude of nation ships, not only just within the line itself, different Pan-Asian countries, but also they're coming from other nations. So at the high tiers, we have basically a Fletcher, at tier 9, an Allen M. Sumner class at tier 10, and a Benson at tier 8. There's the Gajimata is a British destroyer. There's a Gnevny class Russian destroyer. It's everywhere. We've got everything. And so it's hard to build one captain skill for each one of these because every one of these is going to play just slightly different. And my recommendation is, if you are building these captains for the long haul, meaning you're going to take them to your 8, 9, and 10, your US destroyers, that's why you're going to be seeing these a lot. Of course, really we could say 7, 8, 9, and 10, because Gajimata does play an awful lot like basically a US destroyer does, in that it has a lot of guns with very good rate of fire. So with that, the first build I'm going to talk about is a balanced build, and this is going to be the build that I am personally going to run. And it is going to start off with preventative maintenance for the 30% reduction in the chance of having a module, which is your engine, rudder, primary armament, or torpedoes, incapacitated. So 30% reduction in that is super nice. We'll get to talking about priority target in just a minute. We'll get to talking about some other skills in just a minute. From there, we're going to go to last stand, which allows the ship to continue to move under its own power as well as steer at a reduced rate, even though its engine and rudder are taken out. This is a non-negotiable tier 2 skill. Not having this on your destroyer is a death sentence if you get caught with your engine or rudder taken out. I cannot stress that enough. In the tier 3 slot, I'm going to start off with torpedo armament expertise. And there's going to be some people that raise their eyebrows to that. And let me explain why. These destroyers have torpedoes that are extremely potent and extremely powerful. When utilized correctly, their short detection range of 0.8 kilometers is basically point blank range. It's hard for ships to actually avoid them. And so having a 10% reduction in your torpedo tube reload time is just an added benefit. It's not quite the same mentality as with the Germans, where we're all about just spamming torpedoes at will. This is more finesse than that. However, they are going to be a huge chunk of the amount of damage that you do. And so as a result, that 10% reduction in torpedo tube reload time from torpedo armament expertise is the reason why I'm taking this. Of course, the other side to that is needing the concealment to actually use those. So concealment expert for the 10% reduction in the detection range of any destroyer. This makes Yoyang the stealthiest tier 10 destroyer by 1/10 of a kilometer. You wouldn't think that would add up much, but it does, especially when you're outspotting everything else. Maybe except for, Kageros and Yugamos as you run into them in battle. which I think are the only stealthier destroyers that this ship can encounter. Maybe Fletcher's up there too, I don't know. Anywho, from there, it's going to go to Survivability Expert. And this is going to add 350 hit points for every tier that the ship is. So the Yoyang with tier 10, it's going to add 3,500 hit points. It's going to take us up to our 22,000 hit points. Now, why would I take this skill, Survivability Expert, on the Pan-Asian destroyers? And that's because at the higher tiers, starting about tier 7 and going on up to tier 10, you start to run into U.S. destroyers or a British destroyer that acts like a U.S. destroyer, and that those ships are very good at contesting caps. In fact, you actually get radar on the Yoyang, and I think the Chungmu, which is a Fletcher, also gets it. It's very short range and it's very short duration, however, and you have to give up your smoke for it. However, that makes it very good at hunting destroyers. Maybe not as good as the German destroyer line is at doing that. However, it's still U.S. guns on U.S. destroyers. They are very effective at hunting destroyers and contesting caps. Plus, you have excellent concealment, which just adds to it even further. So, to me, having a little bit of extra hit points is not only going to allow you to survive contesting the cap at the beginning of the match, but it's going to keep you in the fight longer to use those torpedoes later in the match, which is a massive benefit. Now, this third slot is one area where I could see some concessions being made for the lower tier ships. And I have on my notes here a split between Superintendent, which is going to add an additional charge to all of your consumables, or Basic Firing Training, which is going to reduce the reload time of your main battery by 10%. It's also going to boost your anti-aircraft defense by 20%, which I think is really the bigger advantage of Basic Firing Training for these ships, because the reload time for most of these ships is going to be plenty quick. Now, on the Superintendent side, you can see it already has 5 charges of smoke. And the smoke is different. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into each individual destroyer and how it behaves, and the reasons why it has so many consumables of smoke. But that's a lot of charges of smoke even without it. Now boosting that to 6, the extra speed boost consumable or radar would come in handy, depending on how you want to set up your higher tier ships. So a good case could be made for either or. In the next 2 points, going to Adrenaline Rush, which is going to reduce the reload time of all armaments, which is going to be your main battery and torpedoes, by 0.2% for every 1% of hit points lost. And you wouldn't think that this would add up to a huge amount of time, but it does actually come into play, especially at the end of the match, when a ship might not be nearly as hot, as full on hit points. You might be down to a third or a quarter hit points, maybe even less, and it's going to make those torpedoes come out fast. And these torpedoes, like I said, if you can aim with them, they're devastating because they just appear next to you. Poof, dead. So, Adrenaline Rush, definitely a must. And from there, we have a 1-point skill just floating around, and I've chosen to take Priority Target. And really, at this tier, there's really not too many other real viable options. Expert Loader, you're in a destroyer. Most of these have less than a 6-second reload time, so you don't need the 50% reload reduction when switching shell types while loaded. You just shoot what you got and switch. There's really no reason to take Expert Loader. Incoming Fire Alert, Priority Target's going to give you basically the same information for the same skill point. Some people would tell you that Incoming Fire Alert, it does have its advantages, but personally I don't find it to be that useful of a skill. Nothing that my Mark 1 eyeballs can't fix. Of course, I have the same comment about Priority Target, but we have an extra point to throw around, so why not? This next build, I'm going to call it a Destroyer Hunter build, and it's going to start off the exact same way. It's going to start off with Preventative Maintenance, go to Last Stand, and from here we make a change. We're going to take Survivability Expert right away as opposed to Torpedo Armament Expertise. In fact, we won't see Torpedo Armament Expertise in this build. So again, Preventative Maintenance, Last Stand, Survivability Expert, Concealment Expert, From there, we go to Superintendent, then to Adrenaline Rush, and then we have our choice between either RPF, which is a 4-point skill that's going to take and show you the direction roughly via a little indicator around the center of your screen of the closest enemy ship to you. It doesn't tell you how far or exactly where it is. It just kind of says, okay, it's off to your left, it's off to your right, it's straight ahead of you more or less. It can be a useful skill for rooting out destroyers, especially in the late game when there aren't as many ships spotting. However, I don't find that there's really anything that RPF or radio location really tells you that a amount of situational awareness and gamecraft can't teach you. In other words, what I'm saying is the situations in which RPF is useful are much more narrow if you have a lot of experience in the game. And that's just my own personal opinion of it. I personally don't run it on any of the ships that I currently have. I just don't find it that useful. A good field craft and knowing the game, good game knowledge, really replaces RPF and allows you to spend those 4 points elsewhere. So where else would I spend those 4 points? Well, I have basic firing training, which is, again, that 10% reduction in the reload time in the main battery, which, okay, that can help you out DPS some enemy ships, and that AA increase, as well as priority target for the remaining 1 point on that. Of course, you could substitute that for any of these 3-pointer skills. This last build I'm going to call it a survivability build, but like all destroyers, your survivability is contingent upon your ability to WASD, as well as use islands and smoke effectively, and survivability builds more or less are on these ships anyway. It's not exactly a strong build, simply because you are so fragile and because it is so easy to take you out. But this can help mitigate the damage to modules, which can be extremely frustrating, even if you're not always taking, huge amounts of hit point loss due to incoming fire. Sometimes it's that one cruiser that gets that one lucky shell that knocks out your engine and forces you to, only go 10 knots because that's all last stand will let you go. And that's when the enemy cruisers catch up to you. So this build is focused more or less on your consumables for repairing stuff, as well as your consumable reload rate in general. So again, that's going to be speed boost, smoke, and that's really it. Radar, if you choose that at the higher tiers, but that's really, and your damage control party, which is your instant repair. So this build is going to start off with preventative maintenance. And this is, that 30% reduction in the risk of incapacitation to modules. The other option here is priority target, but personally, knowing how many ships are actually focusing on you at that time is really not that useful compared to a flat 30% reduction in the chance of your engine and rudder being taken out. That's just my opinion on it. From there, it goes to last stand, then to survivability expert, then to concealment expert. Seeing a trend? From there, it's going to go to Superintendent for the extra smoke charge and speed boost, or radar if you choose to replace your smoke with radar at the higher tiers. And then it's going to go to Adrenaline Rush. Then it's going to go to High Alert, which is a 10% reduction in the reload time of your damage control party consumable, which is that instant repair. And then to Jack of all trades, which is going to reduce the reload time of all of your mounted consumables by an additional 5%, including the damage control party, I believe. Somebody's going to correct me on that, I know it. With my luck, it probably doesn't apply. I for whatever reason, I'm thinking it does. Maybe I'm thinking of... No, I'm pretty sure it applies to that. So that's the kind of the survivability build. You notice it focuses on getting your consumables back quicker, as opposed to, mitigating damage in any way. Like fire prevention, I wouldn't necessarily run that on a destroyer because you don't ever really get set on fire more than a couple places, and your damage control party comes back up so quick, and fires do so little damage to begin with to destroyers. So there's a couple other skills that I have not really mentioned in this. Vigilance is one that a lot of people will take on destroyers. This is going to add 25% to the acquisition range of torpedoes. This can be extremely useful if you are definitely chasing after destroyers, and this is why I mentioned in the Destroyer Hunter builds, you could replace basic firing training with any of the 3-point skills and come out basically the same. Vigilance wouldn't be a bad choice there, personally, but I find that's a little bit of attention to detail. You can tell when enemy destroyers are going to start turning to launch their torpedoes. I really don't think this is that useful of a skill. Plus, you're in a destroyer that's fairly maneuverable. You're going to be able to spot and have enough time to react to those torpedoes without any real issues. So that's kind of my 3, builds that I'm throwing out there for you guys to think and ponder over. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think, and subscribe and like if you haven't already. I'm your Peacekeeper. Thanks for watching.